Hello again, and welcome to another edition of Can You Hear Me? I'm Eileen Rochford, CEO of the marketing and strategy firm, the Harbinger Group.
And I'm Rob Johnson, president of Rob Johnson Communications. If you listen to this program, you know that we have high-level, interesting, dynamic guests share with us the depth of their wisdom. But for the first time, we're going to continue the conversation with one of them. We're going to get more wisdom from a marketing and communications legend.
Yes. So last episode, we had Ron Culp, a 40-year marketing and communications veteran, talk about where the industry came from and how he worked his way from journalism to government to the highest echelons of some of the most noteworthy PR firms and corporations of their time, like Sears, Kraft, Sara Lee, Golan, and Ketchum, just to name a few.
So as we continue the conversation today, Ron, I want to ask you what you think it takes to be successful. I know that sounds like a catch-all. We heard you talk a little about work-life balance in the last episode. Is that one of the cornerstones of success?
Well, first of all, I got in trouble once at a PRSSA conference a few years ago because I had a question about work-life balance. And I said, oh, give me a break. Forget about work-life balance. And the crowd just, I said, no, you're too young to worry about work-life balance. You're going to work your butts off to make yourself indispensable in your organization. Put in the time and the energy during the early part of your career, and it's going to pay huge dividends. Tell you a quick story. My Reet Wolford, now Sanford, she's been married since. She was an intern that I discovered once when I went down to the University of Alabama, and she picked me up at the airport and took me to campus and then took me back to the airport. And I said, where are you going to work? And she said, well, I'm probably going to move home to Louisville to work at an agency or something. And I know you're not. You're going to go to Chicago. I don't know anyone in Chicago. Happen to know somebody. Long story short, she gets hired as an intern at Ketchum. And every time I would come into the office after a client meeting or whatever at about 5 o'clock, I'd get run over by a lot of the interns and other staff leaving. And I'd work fairly late. And one night I walked by and there she is sitting on the floor. She's cutting out stuff and she's making storyboards in the business development office. And so I said, well, that's kind of cool. So I stopped in and asked what she's doing. She said, well, they look really stressed out and busy. So before leaving, I asked if I could help. Then she did the same with the research department once. And she did not once, often. And by the time her internship came up, they were lined up to hire her. She had such a reputation that she became indispensable to the organization. So guess what? She is now running the business development business for Ketchum, the new business area of Ketchum in Europe. And they sent her to Davos, and she has absolutely become a super rock star. And she put in the time and effort, and she has a good family life, but she's always there, and she's still always there. So just find ways to raise your hand. I also find, by the way, this is a secret. You can often say, as you're walking out the door, is there anything I can do to help you? Probably 7 times out of 10, the answer is, oh, no, you go on home. Okay, fine, but I asked.
That is fantastic advice. And it still holds true today. Wouldn't you all agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. Even though there is that march to the door, at 5, or the turning off of the computer, at 5:30.
Well, and some people turn it off on a Friday and it's off until Monday at 10 o'clock in the morning. And I'm sorry, on your way up in your career, and even as this old timer, I never let that happen. It's you can make a window to get that work done. But it's the senior people in our profession become indispensable when the CEO or whoever the senior management people are you're dealing with know that they can rely on you when you're available, when you appear to be available, including when you're on vacation or whatever's going on in your life. It really is very important. Again, you don't have to if you're satisfied with where you are in your career, but generally after a while, most people want a promotion. The only way you're going to get there is through that avenue.
Yeah. It's tough to teach that these days, but those who kind of heed the advice certainly go really far, really fast. Yeah, that's good. I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you. Okay, so I'd like to touch on one more topic. Recently, on another episode of our podcast, Rob and I discussed this idea that communications professionals are increasingly at the table when the big decisions are being made. And particularly at the table when business strategy is being discussed or even architected or developed and the need for that to take place. So we're curious, what is your thought about the elevation, essentially, of the very senior communications role within organizations and companies? And how should people in those very positions be viewing their jobs and approaching their jobs?
Well, it is something that you've observed, as I have over the past few decades, that, again, evolving from that order taker to, holy cow, they're telling me I actually have a seat at the table. You've been asking for it for so long. Now you got it. And in order to keep it, you absolutely have to know the business. And so, as I would recommend, you go into any business, whether it's the agency or corporate side or a big organization, nonprofit even. And I want to know somebody in every area of that company, whether it is the chief legal officer, the CFO, the buyers, obviously, if there's a sales function, you want to know the people in charge of sales. And you want to have a network within that organization that helps inform you, because you do become the conduit and the consolidator very often of what is being thought in the organization and needs to be shared with senior management. And you're sometimes called upon by the CEO to provide, not sometimes, often. Quick story on, I had one big line of business president at Sears who took me to coffee one day, and he knew he assumed, he said, well, because you have the ear of the boss, I wanted to share this with you and hopes you could discuss it with him. The guy sits in the same leadership team I do. And so I said, okay, fine. And I thought it was kind of unusual, but I go in during my weekly meeting with the CEO. I said, I'll eliminate his name, but so-and-so said that he really feels this way. And Arthur said, are you kidding me? Why in the hell didn't he tell me this directly? I meet with him once a week, just like you. And I said, well, maybe he's afraid to. He said, well, it's a good idea. And I went back and I said, yeah, I think he'd like to talk to you about it. And it just, but by being accessible and you want within the organization people to trust you and to help you become, and I didn't want to call it a gatekeeper. I just thought that I wanted to keep things rolling, and you keep things rolling through good communications.
And relationships.
And relationships.
Yeah.
It's network and relationships.
Yeah.
Network and relationships.
Yeah.
I can't underscore it enough.
Yeah, obviously the person who approached you, because they didn't want to speak to your mutual boss, felt very comfortable with you to do so, which is great. So that's relationship, right? And then when you didn't just, take credit for the idea or whatever others, sometimes do in situations like that, and brought it back to him, said, hey, you should go and have that convo because he's going to be real receptive to it. You just ingratiated yourself even further. So that's a great example.
And I think good communicators, once they get a certain comfort level with the boss, I always thought, if I can't do this job the way I want to do it, then fine, I'll be fired and I'll go someplace else and do it. So you have to have the confidence in the fact that you're probably going to land. It might take 4 months or more, but you're going to land okay. And just make sure that you're giving it your best, rather than, as that individual was just a little insecure, not a little, a lot, because that wasn't the first time that, and he just didn't know where he stood with the boss. Well, as a result, he stood in far higher order afterwards by having shared a really important idea that helped advance that business.
Wow. So if he had just worked on his relationship with his boss, things could have been far different.
Yeah. And you were the conduit, and you were the conduit. So you look good on all fronts. So you mentioned earlier about making yourself indispensable, and you gave some pretty good anecdotes about how to do that. But I want to ask the question just a touch differently. And I don't know if you have a different answer. Technology is redefining the jobs of almost everybody in this profession, marketing and communications. So when you're up against technology, how do you make yourself indispensable?
Again, you touched on it, the word relationships. I tell my students that just tear up your resume. I don't even want to see your resume. I want to look at your LinkedIn profile. I want to make sure that you have 500 plus LinkedIn connections before you get out of my classes. I usually give them a couple of years to get it done, since some of them are starting from scratch. But so you need to have connections, and then you have to dive into them in such a way that you can create some relationships as a result of them. And you have to make sure that you I don't know something about AI, for instance. Well, I have friends who are currently taking courses in AI, and I'm probably going to be taking one, even though I thought I was just going to cave into letting somebody else do it for me. But I need to know what is going on, because my students are using it more than I am, and that gives me a disadvantage. So when you see something, especially in the technology area, that you're not comfortable with, rather than say, but I'm too old to learn that, you have to know the basics. Someone is there to help you learn it. That's a great thing about our profession. Somebody will know it, or know somebody who's going to be able to give you a crash course to make you more comfortable. And it's so much easier to do if you built that relationship with somebody who you can turn to give you that kind of advice.
Absolutely. I love that. I'm hearing be the driver who embraces, the change in the knowledge to be able to change.
Yeah. Be the driver of your own career. No one else is going to be doing it for you. There are a lot of mentors and sponsors out there, but you still have to be the one who makes it happen if you want it to happen.
That's right. If you want it to happen.
If I could say something briefly, the last time we all saw each other in person was a few weeks back at the Communication Leaders of Chicago AI event at DePaul University, hosted by you and the crew at DePaul. So to your point about, learning it and doing that sort of thing. I mean, that was a very eye-opening, interesting moment and event that evening. And of course, it was great to see you, and it was great to learn a lot more about it. So we were all kind of investing in that, weren't we?
Yeah, for sure.
We were. I was taking copious notes, and I've had a lot of follow-up questions. And now you check the Communications Leaders of Chicago website. We posted kind of an infographic and other materials that will just kind of be a crib sheet for those of us who don't really know enough about it, but to give you enough confidence that you could have a conversation with somebody that says, tell me a little bit about it. Because very often our bosses are going to know less than we do, but we have to know more in order to give them the kind of counsel that they need. So it's easy to do. Information is so easy to do compared to when we were first starting out in this profession, and there's no such thing as Google.
Right. That's right. And there are endless opportunities to learn about, the different tools and technologies that are impacting our industry. No doubt about it. It's an issue of setting aside the time and committing yourself to doing so. And that's what I observe of people, who I mentor or on the team that I lead personally. It's even explaining to people, if you're not dedicating, 10, 15 hours a month of your, frankly, own time to listen, to read, to join webinars, inside and outside of business hours, and then kind of making up for it, you're never going to be able to keep up in this industry. That's
the learning never ends. And if it does for you, then you're done.
Yeah.
Yep. One tip along those lines.
Yeah,
Eileen,
let's hear it.
Is when you're getting on a plane, I go by the newsstand and I pick up a publication of something I have no godly interest in. I'm sorry to say, golf, or whatever it is, popular mechanics, things I'm just not familiar with. And I'm reading it and trying to figure out some things, because eventually it may lead to a conversation that it looks really good if you have a little bit of understanding. And it's so easy to do. So a lot of people would never gravitate to something as foreign as a publication in an area where they have no interest. But I find it fascinating to find out about what tournaments being played and who the major players are and whether Tiger's son is for real and all that sort of stuff. So I'm not interested in golf, but I certainly could probably have a basic conversation with any executive who wants to talk about it.
And that's intellectual curiosity, and that's a reporter at heart. You got to know a little something about everything, don't you?
You know that story.
Absolutely. That's excellent advice, though, because it completely goes against our natural instincts.
Yeah.
And being, your storied career and where it's led you through that intellectual curiosity is just an endorsement of the very advice you just gave. So I appreciate that. I appreciate you being with us today.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you would like our listeners to hear?
Well, this has been delightful, and it's probably gone on longer than you ever intended. But going back to your mention of Al Golan, and I'd say use his wise advice. You always talk about love what you do. And as a matter of fact, he said, love what you do and you'll never work a day in your life. And, you're still working, but I still love what I do. And being with you guys today, I love that too. So thanks for inviting me.
Oh, and I'm just so happy to be in your presence. It's just great. You're just just a wonderful light for so many people. And we appreciate you being with us to share that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank you. Okay, guys, there's a close here that we're going to have to jump to so we can wrap it up. But there's a whole bunch that we'll put in our show notes, referencing many of the things and recapping many of the things that Ron shared with us today. So thank you again for joining us today, Ron Culp. That's going to do it for another edition of our show, Can You Hear Me? I'm Eileen Rochford. If you would like to weigh in on this podcast, other topics you'd like to hear us cover, any feedback in general, you can always find us on our LinkedIn page, the Can You Hear Me podcast LinkedIn page, and there's a link to it in our show notes as well.
And I'm Rob Johnson. We thank you so much for listening. And if you like this show, please consider giving us a review on any of the platforms where you found Can You Hear Me? That's Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. Your reviews help other smart folks find our show. Thanks for listening.